I want to talk to you today about what the Bible says about depression. And if you consult almost any book, do a Google search on Bible and depression, you're going to come up with a passage that we'll deal with today. This is 1 Kings 19, the story of Elijah in his bout with depression. So let's dive into our text. Beginning in verse 1, Now Ahab told Jezebel everything Elijah had done and how he had killed all the prophets with the sword. That's last week's passage, the great contest on Mount Carmel. So Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah to say, May the gods deal with me, be it ever so severely, if by this time tomorrow I did not make your life like one of them. In other words, she's saying, I am going to kill you. Elijah was afraid, and he ran for his life. He came to Beersheba in Judah, and he left his servant there, while he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness. He came to a broom bush, sat down under it, and prayed that he might die. Got a picture here of a guy under a broom bush. You can see it's pretty dry, and that little bush wouldn't provide much shade, much relief from the hot sun. Elijah says, I have had enough, Lord. He said, take my life. I am no better than my ancestors. So we see here that he's deeply depressed, and how does God deal with his depression? Verse 5, Then he lay down under the bush and fell asleep. All at once an angel touched him and said, Get up and eat. What do we learn? What do you learn from dealing with depression from that verse right there? He fell asleep. He looked around, and there by his head were some bread baked over hot coals and a jar of water. He ate and he drank, and then he lay down again. What do we learn about dealing with depression from that verse right there? Verse 7, the angel of the Lord came back a second time, touched him and said, Get up and drink, for your journey is too much for you. So he got up and ate and drank. Strengthened by the food, he traveled 40 days and 40 nights, about 200 miles from what we can tell, until he reached the Horeb, the mountain of God, also known as Mount Sinai. And you can see he started up north here. There's Mount Carmel, and worked his way down and down and down. And you see it's a pretty long trip, about 200 miles if you can think about walking that far. Here's a picture of what it might have looked like. We're not for sure exactly where this mountain was, but here's one picture of what it may have looked like. There he went into a cave, and he spent the night, and the word of the Lord came to him. What are you doing here, Elijah? What are you doing here? He actually asked him this question twice. We have a picture of a possible cave, Elijah. We don't know, again, if this is the cave for sure. This is looking out of the cave, the kind of view that Elijah would have had, and a close-up of the cave. You can imagine Elijah sitting there, but the point of showing you these pictures is just to point out again that these stories are rooted in history. Let's see 3 observations and then 7 applications of what we can find from this story. Observation number 1, everyone gets depressed. Everyone gets depressed. Elijah got depressed, and you're going to get depressed, and I get depressed sometimes, and for some people it's a very severe thing, and some people not so much, but all of us get depressed. Robert Morgan says, fits of depression come over most of us. Charles Spurgeon once told his students, the strong are not always vigorous. The joyous are not always happy. Spurgeon himself was living proof, for he often suffered agonizing periods of depression. Martin Luther was depressed. In fact, he was so depressed one time that his wife came in with a black dress on, like she was dressed to go to a funeral. And he said to her, where are you going, honey? It looks like you're going to a funeral. I didn't realize that somebody died. And she said, Martin, the way you're behaving lately, I thought that God had died, so I came prepared to attend his funeral. This quoted by Billy Graham, but the point is everyone gets depressed. Second observation, great lows often come after great highs. Great lows come after great highs, as they did in this case. He had this great high at Mount Carmel, and immediately after he had this great low. Life has highs and lows, as in a mountain range. The lows often come right after the highs. I thought about this as I climbed the highest peak in Texas the other day, and it was an exhilarating hike, but you know what happens after you get to the top of that peak? Well, you got to go back down, and that's how life is. You get up and you get down, and sometimes the downs come right after the big lows. Observation number 3, depression could have a chemical component that could be helped by medicine. And I'm obviously a theologian and a preacher and a Bible teacher. I am not a clinical psychologist, and I would say to you, you may need the help of a clinical psychologist in the medicine that they provide. But I would say 2 things about this as a theologian and a Bible teacher, and that is we've nearly all known people who were greatly helped by medicine, and if that is you, Take your medicine and don't have any hesitation or shame about it. You don't have any hesitation or shame if you need medicine for anything else. And if you need medicine to help you with your depression, according to your psychologist, I would encourage you to take your meds. We've all known people who did pretty well when they're on their meds and then get off their meds and they wouldn't do so well. And I would encourage you, if you need to take medicine, to take that medicine. And then I would also encourage you, and I think psychologists would generally speaking agree with this, if you can get along without medicine, I think we're all better off in general to get along without medicine. So there's that tension. It's good to grasp the one and not let go of the other. Whoever fears God will avoid all extremes. And so if you need the meds, take the meds and take it without any hesitation or shame. But if we can get along without medicine, all the better. Let's look now at 7 applications from this passage. Step 1 was sleep. Verses 5 and 6, then he lay down under the bush and fell asleep. Then a little while later, he ate and drank, and then he lay down again. I had a good friend who was a psychologist, and whenever he came and saw someone who was depressed, the first thing he would say to them, I want you to go home and I want you to get 3 good nights of sleep and come back and see me, and we'll get started on our work then. But sleep is an incredibly important force in helping us deal with the blues. One of my favorite verses, in vain you rise early and stay up late, toiling for food to eat, for he grants sleep to those he love. This article from the Sleep Foundation says depression and sleep are closely connected. Almost all people with depression experience sleep issues. In fact, doctors may hesitate to diagnose depression in the absence of complaints about sleep. Depression and sleep issues have a bidirectional relationship. In other words, we tend to think that depression causes lack of sleep, and it does. If we are depressed, we won't be able to sleep very well. But it is also true that lack of sleep causes depression, and you can attack this on either end. And if we can do what we can to get some sleep, all the better. This website says that over 75% of people with depression have some sort of sleep disorder. So the first thing we want to do is, in as much as it depends on us, try to get some rest. Second thing we want to do is eat. He lay down under the bush and fell asleep. At once an angel touched him. Get up and get something to eat. Next verse, the angel came to him second time, touched him and said, get up and get something to eat. Let's look at what science says about diet and depression. Diet is such an important component of mental health that it has inspired an entire field of medicine called nutritional psychiatry. Mind-body medicine specialist Eva Selhub has written a superb summary of what nutritional psychiatry is about and what it means for you right here on this blog, and Google it if you're interested in reading. But then we've got a summary of the summary, and it goes like this. What it boils down to is this, that what we eat matters for every aspect of our health, but especially for our mental health. Several recent research analyses looking at multiple studies support that there is a link between what one eats and risk of depression. Specifically, one analysis concludes a diet pattern characterized by a high intake of fruit, vegetables, whole grain, fish, olive oil, low-fat dairy, and antioxidants, and low intakes of animal foods was apparently associated with decreased risk of depression. He goes on to say that the opposite is often true. Generally speaking, the same food that'll make you thin and healthy will also make you mentally healthy as well. And so the first thing we want to do is, did you get it? Sleep. Second thing we want to do is eat. Third thing we want to do is to move our bodies. Here's our verse. He got up and ate and drank, strengthened by the food. He traveled 40 days and 40 nights, to say best I can tell, about 200 miles, and went 300 miles north, nights until he reached Horeb, the mountain of God. Well, we looked at what science says about depression and sleep. Let's look at what science says about depression and eating. This from the Harvard Health Publisher. Exercise is an all-natural treatment to fight depression. This website says the benefits of exercise for the clinically depressed. And this one, depression and anxiety, exercise eases symptoms. Martin Luther conquered his depression by going outside to work in his garden. Surprisingly enough, one of the best ways to handle depression is to go to work immediately on the task that you enjoy least. And it's completely anecdotal evidence, but my research indicates that people who go hiking are rarely in bad moods. You go out and get some sunshine and move your body and get outdoors, and it just tends to put you in a better mood. And so the first thing we want to do is sleep, eat, move our bodies. Step 4, find some friends. Verse 10 says, am I the only one left? And now they're trying to kill me too. And when you feel alone, it's going to contribute to your depression. And God says to Elijah, yet I reserve 7,000 in Israel, all whose knees have not bowed down to Baal and whose mouths have not kissed him. And he's saying to Elijah, you are not alone. O.S. Hawkins says one of the sure symptoms of depression is detachment, isolation, and withdrawal. These are among the first symptoms of depression. When Elijah went into the wilderness and sat down under a broom tree, broom bush, NIV had it, he removed himself from others. And just by the way, you want to make a great church, you want to make a great small group, here's what you do. You want to cultivate a group of people who say to themselves, not what am I going to get out of church today, not what I'm going to get out of that sermon today, not what am I going to get anything out of the teaching today or out of the music today, but go to church with the intention of, how can I help somebody else? How can I encourage somebody else? How can I serve somebody else? And they see church as an opportunity for relationship and pouring into that relationship, not an opportunity to just put my bucket under the faucet of somebody else's teaching. Step number 5, change your stinking thinking. Again, O.S. Hawkins, detachment and despondency led to deception. In the case of Elijah, he's talking about here, led to deception, to a self-deception fed by faulty thinking. Elijah moaned, I am the only one left. But God quickly reminded him that 7,000 other people had not bowed to the world's false gods. But Elijah was deceived. I listened in both of these books. I didn't finish either one of them, but I listened in both of these books this week in preparation for this teaching. And this is what they say about changing your stinking thinking. Drugs are the most common treatment for depression in the United States, and there is widespread belief, and I would say widespread belief inside and outside the church, popularized by the media, that drugs are the most effective treatment. However, this opinion is not consistent with the results of many carefully conducted outcome studies during the past 20 years. These studies show that the newer forms of psychotherapy, especially cognitive therapy, can be at least as effective as drugs, and for many patients appear to be more effective. The first principle of cognitive therapy is that all your moods, your feeling, are all created by your cognitions or your thoughts. A cognition refers to the way you look at things, your perceptions, your mental attitudes, your beliefs. In other words, what modern science has discovered is that if you will take every thought captive, as Paul told us, take every thought captive. I could summarize both of these books by saying they teach you how to take every thought captive. In other words, you're feeling a certain way, and this writer will invite you to say, what is the thought that is driving this feeling, and how can I contest that thought? It includes the way you interpret things, what you say about something or someone to yourself. You feel the way you do right now because of thoughts you are thinking at this moment. And I would say that's not exactly right. In other words, it's not just the thoughts that you're thinking at this moment, but it's been the thoughts that you've been thinking over the last 20 years. Your thoughts actually change your brain. Your thoughts actually change your brain. And so they make it easier for you to keep thinking those thoughts and feeling what you have been feeling. We have a tendency to think stuff happens and therefore I feel depressed. But what we learn is from science is that stuff happens and then I interpret what happens. And what the Bible says is you can take every thought captive. You can make a different interpretation of what happens. And you will feel what you feel based not on what happens, but on what the interpretation of what happens. Science reveals those people who took antidepressant drugs, there was 20% of them who had a complete recovery. It's the part in green that we're interested in here. And for those who changed their stinking thinking, for those who took every thought captive, we're still looking at the part in green, and we see a 75% recovery for those who changed their stinking thinking. The sixth thing that Elijah did is he encountered God. After the earthquake came a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. After the fire came a gentle whisper, and we are to understand that God was in that gentle whisper. And how do you encounter God? How do you encounter God? Do you know very quickly the answer to that question? Do your people know the answer to that question? Can you ask him, how can you encounter God? And I would say we can do at least two things. First of all, we can start. Did you know what's coming next? Start your day with your Bible on your lap. And it will not happen every day, but oftentimes you will sense the presence of God as you start your day with the Bible on your lap. And I would encourage you, secondly, to spend some time in worship. And we'll talk more about that next week. But spend some time in worship. And you cannot guarantee that you will have a sense of the presence of God, but you can up the chances that you will have the blessed experience of experiencing the presence of God as we start our day with our Bible on our lap and spend some time in worship. Well, the last thing that Elijah did is he served. And here's our verse 9. There he went into a cave and spent the night. And the word of the Lord came to him and said, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" And then in verse 13, then a voice said to him, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" And he asked him to go out and do his work, which is anoint the kings. And we won't read that part of the passage, but here's the thing I want you to get. If you do what depressed people do, you will come to feel as depressed people feel. What God asked Elijah was, "What are you doing?" Because if you do what depressed people do, you will come to feel as depressed people feel. And conversely, if you do what happy people do, you will come to feel what happy people feel. And what do happy people feel? Well, we know from the research. They get enough rest. They eat their veggies. They move around. They move their bodies. They surround themselves with friends. These are the very things you will not feel like doing if you're depressed. You won't feel like seeing any friends. But if you will see some friends anyway, if you will do what happy people do, you will come to feel what happy people feel. And what do? They rest, they eat, they exercise, they surround themselves with friends, they seek an encounter with God, they change their stinking thinking, they come to think rightly, they take every thought captive, and lastly, they involve themselves in meaningful work. And I believe if you will consistently engage in these things, you can deal with most of the depression that comes our way. And may God richly bless you as you teach these truths to your people this week.